When we look at our own work, one of the things we find difficult to separate is the experience of capturing the image or working on the image. So you'll hear people when they're talking about their own work say, we had to climb this hill in the dark and it was a 4-hour hike and I ran out of water and, tripped and twisted my ankle and carrying it up. And then there was a mudslide and, I stood on one leg and had to hold my breath for 14 seconds. And, and that's why it's a great shot. No, that's just what you went through. The photo either stands up on its own or it doesn't.
Well, hey everyone. Welcome to episode 370 of F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen with your host, Matt Payne. This week on the podcast, I sat down and had a fantastic chat with the 2023 International Landscape Photographer of the Year, Tony Hewitt. Tony is considered a legend in the Australia landscape photography community, and after speaking with him, I can totally see why. In today's show, Tony provides us with some incredible and actionable tips that will surely make you a better photographer while setting you up to perform better in any competition that you see yourself wanting to enter. Even if you hate competitions, I think you'll find some value. Speaking of competitions, just 2 weeks remain until the 4th annual Natural Landscape Photography Awards close for entries. We close on May 31st this year, and we've gone above and beyond to elevate the stakes and to provide even more value for entrants. We have added new prizes that you can win, and we've added a new sponsor this year, B&H Photo. We have over $25,000 in prizes that you can compete for, most notably a place within our Fine Art Coffee Table book, which you get for free if your images make it into the book. But that's not all. This year, we have decided to create a Young Conservation Photographer grant, generously funded by Dario and Gina Perizzolo. At the time of this recording, which is March 30th, the total amount of our grant is $3,500 and climbing. Your support of the competition will help us increase this amount as well, so please do enter the competition. The goal of this grant is to provide a young photographer, age 30 or less, an opportunity to tell an impactful story about a conservation cause relating to the natural world. We see this as our way of helping elevate the career of someone starting out in the field. Please learn more about the new prizes, deadlines, rules, and the new grant award by visiting our website at naturallandscapeawards.com. Cheers. All right, let's get to this week's episode with Tony Hewitt. All right, Tony Hewitt, it is great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, mate. It's really a real pleasure to be here.
Yeah, of course. I feel like every single Australian landscape photographer that I've had on the podcast has recommended you. So it's truly an honor to finally get to have this conversation.
Well, you can't believe everything you hear, but that's really flattering. So thank you very much, and hopefully we can give your listeners and viewers something to take away.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for people who aren't familiar with you, which is probably like 7 people in Afghanistan, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about who Tony Hewitt is?
Look, I live in Perth, Western Australia, which is arguably the most isolated capital city in the world, and about as far from where you are in Colorado as you can get, I think. I'm married. I have 2 daughters. I have 3 grandchildren, only little ones, but yeah, they keep us pretty busy at times. I've been photographing for about 35 years as a professional, and probably 32 of those as a full-time professional. And I started in the wedding game, and I photographed nearly 1,000 weddings. I then moved into portrait and continued to do so. I have a lot of legacy clients or people that have worked with me for a long period of time and keep coming back. I have commercial clients. I shot landscape for fun, which became a little bit more than fun when I sold a few, and then moved into fine art. I have been judging at competitions since about the mid-90s. and sort of competition space is something I've got a lot of experience in as an entrant, as a judge, and as a sort of convener or chairperson of awards and things. So I was a past chairperson of the Australian Photography Awards for about 3 years and ran those. I've been involved as various roles here and overseas in judging competitions. Been fairly successful in competitions here and there, so that's always keeps you on your toes, and it's something to challenge yourself with. Talk a bit more about that later. I've also spoken on photography for a long time, probably since 94, 95. I did my first keynote, and I've done a lot of keynoting there since here and all around the world. So I get lucky to travel. I've got lots of friends all over the world. In fact, arguably, I've got more friends outside of Australia than in terms of people I can sit down, have a beer with, and talk photography and stuff like that. I love the beach. I'm at the beach probably 4 or 5 times a week if I can. Not that I tan very well. My wife's the brown one, but I love the water. I'm a swimmer, scuba diver. I was a diving instructor. I water ski. I barefoot. I fish. I surf. I paddle. Anything to do with the water, mate. You'll get me in there. Obviously, aerial photography is something a lot of people know me for these days, and fine art, and I've been exhibiting and represented now for about 14 years through a gallery here in Australia. And these days it's a mixture of all of those things and more in terms of regular exhibitions and working with clients, putting images into everything from a hotel or an apartment block with 100 pieces to one in someone's lounge room. Coaching, mastermind group, a whole bunch of things which I'm sure we're going to talk about. But yeah, I'm nothing special. I just love photography. I'm lucky. I get to do what I love. I'll never retire, because if I retired, I'd do what I love anyway. So same. I love meeting people. I love talking and sharing. So there's a lot more, but there's a snapshot.
Perfect. That's a great snapshot. That's one thing I noted as you were talking there, which struck me as a little bit funny / interesting. Just today, I did another recording with someone, and we talked extensively about labels. I thought it was interesting that you were very specific about landscape and fine art. And I'd be curious, like, in your mind, like, what is the difference between landscape and fine art, if anything?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. And if you go back to the labels, in the 90s, I was a wedding photographer. And as I said, I shot a lot of weddings, and I did quite well in weddings and won awards in weddings and things like that. And I traveled the States twice doing talks on weddings. But one thing that started to really bug me after a while was, I like a lot of us, I shoot everything. Even a lot of wedding photographers do the weddings because that's where they earn a living. But they'll travel, they'll take photos of sunsets and sunrises and stars and auroras and families, whatever. And I used to get upset or a little bit bugged because people would say, "Oh, you're a wedding photographer." And I thought, no, I'm a photographer who shoots weddings. And then I was a photographer who shot weddings and portraits. And then and it's like, no, I'm a photographer. I'm not in those areas. But I understand that people like to know, well, what genre were you dabbling in? And the fine art thing is an interesting thing, because I have some very good friends who are in the fine art world, and they would look at some of or a lot of what's called fine art in the photography world and say it's got nothing to do with fine art. And a little caveat, I'm not a fine art major. I don't have a degrees didn't even study photography formally. But one of the things I've gleaned about fine art is that it's more about why you're doing it than what you're doing. And often fine art is about the conversation or the discussion or the narrative or the story around why you're taking the pictures. Because you can sort of see people go into an exhibition of fine art and they look at it, and sometimes it's technically excellent, and sometimes they look at it and go, well, there's feet chopped off, it's out of focus, what's going on here? How can they say this is amazing? Why is it worth $500,000 or more? And I think it's got more to do with the photography is part of the story or the conduit to get you thinking about something. Now, people might argue, well, that's what photography does anyway, but I think fine art goes beyond that. And I never called myself a fine art photographer. It was my gallery, the gallery owners or the gallery principals that said, you're fine art. What you're doing is fine art, because when we hear you talk about the story, when you deliver your artist statement, when you talk at your exhibitions about what you've done and why you've done it and what's behind it, that's what makes it fine art. Nowadays, the words, and this is just an opinion, Matt, people out there shoot me down, but there's a lot of people promote themselves as fine art portrait, fine art this. And, we've done it in the past where people have said, oh, do you do fine art portrait? And I'll say, well, yeah, we can. But I don't think it's truly fine art in the commercial sense. So domestic work is not, but we attribute the title or the label to a style. But the problem is the style's not definitive. It could be anything. Your style could be out of focus stuff,
Right.
I only shoot out of focus, and that's why it's fine art. Well, in the fine art world, they probably go, very interesting. In the photography world, they go, that's crap. So, yeah.
Right. And then there's and then of course, there's like a Venn diagram of like fine art and landscape. And, if it's landscape photography that also tells a story and there's a why behind it, then it's like, okay, it can be in both worlds. But
yeah, you can.
I think it's interesting to have those distinctions. And it's also interesting to think about just completely eliminating those distinctions as well.
Yeah, well, I think the thing is, when you look at it, landscape or portrait or wedding that's more about the genre that you're shooting. Whereas fine art has got more to do with the reasons behind it and the philosophies behind it. So I think one is more to do with the thought process behind and the energy you're bringing to it and the purpose and the passion of why you're doing it. Whereas the title landscape is, well, it's a landscape, and
Right.
having written competition rules and things, it's interesting when you start getting people argue that, an urban landscape's not a landscape. Why not? Because there's no land in it. Well, hang on. And you have these huge debates, and it's, personally, I hate getting caught up in any of the politics or the debates. To me, it's just go and have fun, take pictures. If you make people stop and look, it's maybe on the way to a good picture. If you make them think about something or talk about it later, it's maybe on the way to a good picture,
Right. Well, speaking of competitions, you just won the International Landscape Photographer of the Year. How does it feel?
That was fantastic, and I'll tell you a funny story, a true story, hand on heart. I'd forgotten I'd entered it. I've entered it before, and I did have the first couple of years was years ago, and I entered and I didn't do very well, and I thought, my style of work, because maybe it is more towards a fine art abstract look or whatever people want to call it, it didn't fit the classic look that seemed to be doing well in that competition. So I kind of entered a couple of times, didn't enter. And then I was heading to Greece for a photo tour. And before I left, I thought I should enter. So I did. And I was actually sitting at home not long after I got back, and I got a text message that said, oh, congratulations on your big win. And I'm thinking, what? I'm trying to think of what I'd enter, because I don't enter a lot of competitions, sometimes because I can't, because if I'm chairing the competition or, heavily involved, then I feel like I should step back. But I had entered a couple in the last year, but I'd forgotten about that one. And then I thought, and it said something. I said, what competition? They said Il Potty. And I thought, maybe I made the top 100, because really the beauty of that competition is to get in the 101 in the book. That's what most people aim for. So I thought, yeah, okay. So I pulled it up and I just went straight to the book bit. I didn't see the front bit. And I went through the book and I'm looking and looking and looking and looking. I saw my picture. And then as I went back to the beginning, my wife actually was looking over my shoulder and she said, isn't that your picture? And I looked, and that's the moment I realized I'd won. And it was a nice feeling, because we work in a world or in an art form that it's not like 1 + 1 is always going to equal 2, unless you want to get into quantum mathematics or something, and let's not go there. But for most of us, 1 + 1 is always going to equal 2. But in our world, in photography and fine art or whatever, it's not like that. It's opinions on the day, and it's what trends and what moves people and which ones, it's an element of luck and timing. And it's special to know that a group of judges who are from all over the world and very highly regarded, and I've got massive respect for all of those judges, have decided that, this year or that last year, my work stood out. So it's a great feeling, because even after, so many years of being involved, there's a few things that I can take away from competitions. It keeps you on your toes. It keeps you accountable. It forces you to look at your work a little bit with a bit more critique, with a bit more focus. We look at our work, come back from a holiday, we scan it, we're too busy, we don't look at it for another month. But if we're going to enter a competition or something, if there's a reason to look at the picture and pick the best, we pick the best, or at least what we consider our best. It forces us to drive ourselves to our edge, whatever that edge is, and then put it out there. And that's another little lesson, because it's always reminding you that it's only going to be an opinion, and it keeps me honest and accountable to my judging. So when I'm judging, I'm always conscious of the feelings I have when I'm being judged, when I'm passing, giving scores or critiquing, not only to be kind but honest, but also, and to be sensitive, but also to recognize that I'm representing an industry. So as a judge, I'm representing an industry's opinion. When I chair, like in a couple of weeks when I'm in Vegas judging or chairing the panel and getting the group of judges to focus on certain criteria for judging, one of the things we'll talk about is that as a group, we represent the broader community, because as a group of judges, we're telling the broader community this is good and this is not, and this is excellent and this is better. So winning something kind of keeps you balanced as a judge, I think. I'd hate the idea of, and not just winning, but entering and doing well, and entering and not doing well, and reminding yourself that you need to be sensitive when you give feedback. Does that make sense?
It
So, but hey,
does.
It was good to win. It was great. I felt good. I cracked a bottle of red wine and I thought, okay, I like it, and I think you got to do that sometimes. You got to enjoy those. You've got to enjoy those things, because we have enough times when we think we've done something really well with our photos and we don't get the response we expect, and it can be quite debilitating, or puts a hole in our balloon and deflates us. So yeah, if you get a win, enjoy it.
What would you say to those who would suggest that there's no such thing as a competition when it comes to art, in terms of like an objective evaluation of what's better or not better?
I've always carried the opinion that the competition in art or photography, it says to us this is the best, but I think we need to weigh that up against this is the best on the day. It's like watching football teams, and I watched the Super Bowl like most of America and half the rest of the world. But, you're watching two teams and you're wondering, will the best team win, or will the best team on the day win? And it's usually the best team on the day that wins. Now,
Right.
the best team is often the best team on the day, but not always. And that's what makes sport so wonderful. That's what, I'm a sports fanatic. I love it. The last time I was in the States, I went and saw the Knights play the Canadians in Las Vegas. It was just amazing. I didn't really care who won. And sometimes you watch a game of sport and you see the best team lose. They dominate the game, they have more shots, everything, but they lose. They just lose. That's the beauty and the romance of sport. But it's in the competing. And I've always looked at competition, probably since the first 4 or 5 years this started to evolve. The competition space for me personally is about maintenance of a standard. Entering forces me to look at my work more closely and more critically. Putting it out there reminds me that it's vulnerable, that I can't please everybody and I won't please everybody, and not everyone's going to like my work. And then watching with the wins and losses, watching the averages. And if you're good at what you're doing, you're improving, your averages should go up a little bit. And you get a few wins and a few that don't work. But that, if we say to ourselves, I won the landscape photographer of the year last year in the world, I'm the best landscape photographer in the world. Well, that's crap, because I'm not. But last year's competition, my work was the one chosen by an elite panel of judges as the standout portfolio on that day in that moment. Now, a week later, the same judges might have had a slightly different feel. So I think if we go into competition or we look at competition as being an objective measurement of excellence, I think that's not the way to do it. I think I look at it as an opportunity to participate in an experience which challenges you, which keeps you accountable to yourself, which gives you some feedback, which allows you to enjoy some wins along the way, and maybe a few little reminders that you're only as good as your last work and you're not going to please everyone. I think if we go into it thinking it's objective, I don't think that works. I've written rules, I've adjusted rules, and I said not adjusted them illegally, but changed them for the next year. I've had to deal with appeals and questioning around the interpretation of rules. And most rules now, you'll find that there's somewhere in there that says the final decision belongs to the judging committee, whose opinion, and it's an opinion, will be final, and all of that, and you can't go back on it. And the point is, they're saying up front, it's an opinion. But hey, if we're going to get the opinion of a group of people of what's the most outstanding work, should we pick 5 people off the street or get 5 people with 100 years experience between them that have proven themselves in the field? Well, let's get the opinion of the experienced. Doesn't mean I'll agree with them, and doesn't mean they're right. And like all people have entered competitions, I've entered competitions, sent my work away, which I knew was brilliant, and it comes back without a score. The judges were wrong. They obviously got no idea. But the reality is, the judges gave their opinion, and I get to use that opinion and go, okay, I've got to keep working at it. Maybe it's not as good as I thought it was. And there was technical issues that I didn't see. And I look at work that got very good scores in the 90s or the early 2000s of mine, that back then I thought, I produced my absolute best work. And I look back on it now and I think, oh, what was I thinking? Look at it. There's so many problems here. So yeah, I honestly think if people worry, look at competition for what it is. It's an opportunity. It's an experience. It's an area that you get to go to and prove yourself, push yourself, challenge yourself, get feedback, get knockbacks, get wins, and keep your passion going, because it's testing you. Let it test you.
I like
Let it
that.
test you.
Yeah, no, it's interesting too. Like you said, you entered several years ago, didn't get very far, decided, hey, maybe I have a different chance this year. And I think that's the right attitude. And you got to remember too, like people's perceptions change, people's tastes change, what people enjoy changes, the judging panel changes. I mean, and then also keep in mind, like not every competition is kind of like your type of work, whatever your type of work is. Like I entered a competition last year and I look back, I'm like, why did I enter that competition? Like, they don't like landscape photography at all. Like, what was I even thinking? So, I mean, it's like, do some homework before you enter a competition as well. So,
That's a good point, Matt. No, that's a really good point, that if you look at the competitions, they have different sort of biases and trends and things. And I say play the game, but I don't like people to think it's just flippant that it's a game. It is and it isn't, because for some it's very serious. And when I enter, I still have the butterflies. If I'm going to enter 6 images or 8 images, I sit there and, I sit there for a night or two before with a glass of wine, or maybe a bottle of wine or whatever. And I'll just try to chill out and look at the pictures. And then when you press send or you enter and it's done, you kind of most of the time I'll have a few, I shouldn't have done that one. I should have done this one. And, I think that's the real value. It's not what happens from then on in terms of the competition and the results. Yeah, that's one thing, but it's the feelings you're going through, because you're pushing yourself. If you're going to enter, and particularly you've got to pay money to do it, you don't pick out 6 pictures and throw them in. You kind of, you collate, you curate, you're doing all of these skill sets that make you better. And I look at it and send it off, and I remind myself that, hey, I've already got most of the value I'm going to get from entering that competition. And if you win one, which, lucky enough, every now and then I've won one, there's other agendas for me too. I like to remind people that, I'm 61 and I've been in the industry for a long time, and I came out of the film days and into digital changeover, and now we're into digital and coming into AI and all sorts of things. And I evolve and I evolve and I evolve. And I like to remind people that I can still compete, like that. When I say compete, that my work is still at that, I'm going to keep trying as hard as I can to stay as close to the top as I can. That's my promise to myself. And sometimes a competition win along the way, it's like, wow, she's still got it, So there's all that sort of things to it as well.
Yeah, no, totally. It's like there's certainly a little bit of ego wrapped up in why we enter competitions, but it's also, I love what you just said about just the process of entering a competition. It forces us to be more critical of our own work and curate on a higher level, and really be honest with ourselves in terms of like, okay, is this actually worth entering? Because if it's not, what am I doing? And so I think that's well said. Do a lot of judging, right? So
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, what's your personal philosophy and approach to the process of judging?
Okay. Let me share this first with the listeners that it might be of value. One of the things you can do for yourself is before you enter competitions, or even if you're not entering competitions, it's just a great way to understand your pictures. Pick out 4 or 5 pictures and maybe do this with a group of other photographers and take turns. And you bring your pictures up. And I used to do this where I'd get a group of photographers, so we're going to have a critique session. We're going to you bring some prints or images, and we're going to look at them on the screen, and we're going to look at the prints, and we're going to critique each other's work. And everyone gets super excited because they think, oh, I'm going to bring my picture, and Matt and Tony and Mary and Sue and Bob are all going to look at the pictures and give me feedback. But when they get there, what they don't understand is what's going to happen is they're going to critique their own work with a couple of rules. And the rules are that I want you to critique your work and tell me why it's so good, but you can only talk about what I can see in the picture. So when we look at our own work, one of the things we find difficult to separate is the experience of capturing the image or working on the image. So you'll hear people when they're talking about their own work say, oh, we had to climb this hill in the dark and it was a 4-hour hike and I ran out of water and, tripped and twisted my ankle and carrying up, and then there was a mudslide and, stood on one leg and had to hold my breath for 14 seconds and that's why it's a great shot. No, that's just what you went through. The photo either stands up on its own or it doesn't. So when you're commenting or giving me an understanding or description of your picture, you can only refer to everything I can see within the frame. And if you say anything that's outside the frame, I'll say stop, because you can't prove that. And we'd all love to be able to, at any competition, when our print or image comes up in front of the judges, be able to say, hold it, and walk out in front of the judges and go, before you look at it, let me explain to you why it's so good. Let me tell you what I had to do to get there, what I went through, blah, blah, blah. It was 100 grand's worth of camera equipment, and I had to have it fixed. And people have all of these reasons why it's a good shot. So we need to separate that. If we're going to enter a competition, we're sending our picture off on its own. And it's got to talk for itself. It's got to fend for itself. You're out of the nest, off you go, it's got to fly. And if it doesn't, there's nothing we can do about it. We have to accept that. And we take that as feedback and go, right, what do I need to equip my little baby, my photo or my image with, so that when it's out there in the world, either in a competition or in an exhibition or just showing people like it for itself, not because I'm standing behind you telling why. Now, going to the judging philosophy, I look at an image and I look at it and there's a couple of things here you talked about doing. I have a little process that I work with, which is quite simple, and that is I look at an image, and this is when I'm judging, shooting, curating, editing my work, and I step back from myself. Do you meditate at all, Matt?
I don't actually. I've wanted to try it, but it doesn't. I have tried it, and it just didn't do anything for me. But
well, you probably find if you go for walks or anything, you're some form of meditation. But stepping back and becoming aware of what you're aware of. So it's called third-party observation, noticing what you notice. So if I sit there and a picture comes around and there's a red bin in the corner, and the first thing I notice is the red bin, I noticed that I noticed that. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So that's got tied up with impact. Where's the impact? What's the first thing that impacts me? Often people think impact is, when I get time to look at it, I'll work out what the impact is. No. Let's think of impact as the first minute you look at it, what's the first thing you notice? Now, if it's a picture of a dancer doing a perfect jump, and in the corner is a red chair, and someone takes the photo of this dancer and says, oh, this is an incredible jump, and the first thing I notice is the red chair, then the impact isn't where they want it to be. And if I give that feedback as a judge, then the person goes, okay, if I really want that dancer to jump out and be the thing you notice, I've got to be aware of what else is competing with it in the frame. So as a judge, I look and I think, okay, what grabbed my attention first? Okay. And as I weigh up the elements within the image, so an image is made up of content and composition. Content, what's in the picture? If I look at your screen, there's a t-shirt, a head, beard, and headphones, a bookshelf, a picture, a wall, and maybe some stuff on a desk. And the composition is the relationship of all of those elements in a frame. And when we change composition, we change the relationship. So if I move myself out of the frame, you start to look at a blank, set of blinds or a cabinet of stuff. If I come back, I tend to be in the middle, but there's a few things around the side. And this is kind of one of the spaces I do talks in. So maybe Tony deliberately put his books there so you'd see them. And yes, maybe I made sure that there's Middlehurst because that's one of the places I do workshops. Yeah, there's a couple of trophies in a cabinet. Hey, okay, he's obviously got some cred, whatever. So when we look at a picture as a judge, we go, that's what I'm seeing. That's how it's relating to each other, which is telling me that's more important than that. And that's the first thing I should be looking at. Now I get to quality. Is it sharp? Is it exposed well? Are there areas blown out, which is not a problem in itself, but there's no reason for them to be blown out. In fact, it's a distraction. And if it's catching my attention, then if there's nothing there, then maybe it's misleading me, so it's not as effective. Judges who fall back on a cliche of there's no detail in the shadows have to be conscious of the fact that it might be a silhouette and there's not meant to be detail in the shadows. Or
right.
The highlights are blown out, and same deal. Maybe it's meant to be a pure white sky. So acknowledge what you see and then ask yourself, does it work? Does it strengthen the story? Does it give me a reason? Or if I can't see the reason, then there might be one, but it's ineffective. So I'm basically following this process. What do I notice? What's in the picture? How are they related? Would it be better if that was over there and that was there and composed differently or placed differently? Is the quality there? Is it good exposure? Yep, that all measures up. Is there a narrative or an aesthetic? So another pet philosophy of mine in judging is not all pictures are about a straight story. Now, again, this is an opinion. There'll be people out there who go, no, he's wrong. But for me, I don't need to see a powerful story or narrative to think it's a great picture, because for me, some pictures are purely a celebration of the aesthetic. Now, you could argue, well, that's a story. Maybe. But I look at it and I go, if you took a picture of a beautiful, perfect red rose against a black background and just lit it so it was just like satin, and you look at it and you go, it's a rose. But it's stunningly beautiful. It just blows me away with its beauty. And it's the aesthetic that is the power. So I don't mind if it's a narrative, like an incredible documentary piece where you just pulls at the heartstrings, makes you want to cry, or a pure aesthetic. Most images fall somewhere in that spectrum. But as long as I can see something like that, now the picture makes sense. Now there's a reason for it. Now it's working in terms of being a powerful piece of communication. So as a judge, I'm looking for something to hang on to. I'm looking for a reason for the picture. I'm looking for how well it's executed. I'm conscious of my biases, and I think all judges should be conscious of their bias, because as judges, like photographers, there's certain things we like and certain things we don't like. I don't believe you should score an image based on likes and not likes in terms of your personal preferences of content. I prefer my personal imagery is more about water and light and things like that. But just because someone photographs a horse on a hill doesn't mean I shouldn't be able to judge that at the highest level. So I've got to look at it and go, how well have they executed whatever it is they're trying to execute?
There's something else woven into that's woven into what you just said, and that's intent. So like, you had mentioned like shadows that have no detail or highlights that are blown out. Like sometimes that's good because if it's done with intent, because it either helps shape the light or shape the composition, or if it's done because the story is about whatever those things that are blown out, like that is where the intent becomes really important in terms of elevating the quality of a photograph.
Correct. Yeah, I agree. Having, I have a background in, do you know what NLP is?
I've heard of it, but no, go ahead.
Neuro-linguistic programming. I studied for 6 years in the area of neurolinguistics and things like that. So it's about the way we think, the way we speak, communication skills. Now, one of the principles of NLP in communication skills is that the meaning of your communication is in the response that you get. So people, often a lot of conflict happens, or argument happens because someone says something to a second party or a group of people, and they respond in a way that that person didn't expect because the meaning they took from it was not what I meant. The problem is if we don't own that. So if the communicator, the person sharing the message, doesn't take the responsibility of ensuring that the message gets through, then no one's going to sort it out because the people on the other end, they get the meaning they get. My job, if I want to get a message across, is to figure out how to get it across to you in a way you understand what I want you to understand, or you take away what I want you to take away. That's the secret of my photography, is I want you, if you don't get what I want you to get out of my pictures, that's on me, not you. It's not because you're visually illiterate. It's not because you don't understand. It's because I didn't deliver it the way I wanted you to understand it. So that's where it's incumbent on me to understand how you think and how you see and how you interpret. Now, that's where you could say, well, okay, if I'm going to enter a competition, if I know who the judges are, I can kind of figure out what they're looking for. Yeah, you could get some advantages down that road by getting a feel for what judges have enjoyed in the past, look at trends and things like that. And it's also sometimes an image can have multiple layers. It doesn't have to have one meaning. It could be a generic doorway to a discussion. It could be about recognizing, for instance, I had a few exhibitions where the principal theme running through them was shifting perspectives. And this was in the early days of my first aerial exhibitions, and my first couple of aerial exhibitions in particular. Nowadays, when you see the work, it looks like drone work. But back then, they weren't using drones. I mean, there was drones around, but people didn't go out and buy drones. They were military and things like that. So shooting from above and showing people a picture of their favorite beach or a location that's famous, but with a planned view, was a shift in perspective. And the message or the narrative was that shifting perspective brings new understandings. And my body of work was designed to get people to think about that. Not necessarily arrive at the same conclusions that I did, but to think about it. That's where that fine art label starts to arguably come in. It's not about the picture. It's about, I want you to start thinking about what it's like to see things from a different perspective. So, for instance, I could take that discussion into a conversation with a board of managers who run groups of people and say, when you come to work and look at your staff, do you see people who just do a job and get paid, or do you see human beings who you could really get to understand better? Your perspective will shift the way you understand them, and if the more you understand them, the better you'll get more out of them. My perspective, when I look at my photography, if I understand that people will have a different perspective because they're looking at it through different eyes, that'll help me adjust and adapt and evolve my photography to be more appealing to a bigger audience. I kind of went off a bit, but you can see where it was going. So that intent, my intent, I usually, once I've got half my exhibition, I start to see what it is about that group of work that I'm responding to or resonating with, and then I look for more images that complement that. And then my artist statement is there to say, this is the space I want you to be thinking about. And when you look at my pictures, I've attempted, my intent is for you to have a visual means by which you can start thinking about these ideas. Now, take that back to a wedding photographer. I'm photographing a wedding. My job over the years, 1,993 weddings or something. My job wasn't to record what your dress looked like and what the church looked like and what sort of car you had. Yes, it was, but it was way more than that. It was to record the romance and the love and the emotion and the feelings and the anxiety and the fear and all of that wrapped up in the pictures. That's the intent behind my wedding photography. When we start, we think, I've got to get a nicely exposed shot of the cake. So I see, in the early days, I'd take assistants and their focus would be on F8. Have I got enough fill flash? Should I kick a light on the cake? They're going to be getting kissed there. They're not thinking about the romance of a wedding. They're trying to get the lighting right and get technically perfect pictures. But technically perfect pictures without any heart and soul are valueless to the couple. Technically average pictures full of heart and emotion and soul will be invaluable to the couple. And if you showed them two pictures, one with no soul at all and one that was technically no good but the perfect smile, they're going to grab that every time. So as professional wedding photographers, our job was to get both. As a landscape photographer, the same thing. I'm out there, I'm watching an aurora in Iceland, I'm watching a sunset over the Greek Isles, or I'm just down my local beach, whatever it is, and I stand there and I go, oh my God, that's beautiful. That's what I want to put in my pictures. Not get the perfect hue of orange and make sure that I don't blow the highlight. Yes, that's granted, but what should be in there is this other stuff.
Yeah.
Sorry, Matt, I told you if you ask a question, I'll keep talking.
No, you're good. It's interesting because as you were talking, I was thinking about when we do judging for the competition I run, and when you get to those later stages in the competition where like everything is really, really, really good, then the process becomes a little bit different because you're looking at images and you're looking at it and you say, okay, what has it got? And you're like, okay, it's got this. Okay, what else does it have? Okay, it's got this and this, and then you just keep going. And like what I've often found is like the images that have lasting power or staying power with the judges, like that list of things that the photo has going for it just keeps going and going and going in terms of the storytelling, the metaphor, the technical execution, the composition, the color story, the color palette chosen, the processing, everything. Like you have all these check boxes and it just keeps going and going. So I think it's interesting to think about it from both angles in terms of, how you think about it when you're curating, but then also like, how is it then going to make it to like past the rest,
Oh, for sure. And, I certainly don't want to play down the technical side of thing in competition. Part of what you're judging is, can people take a decent picture? And, as you move, as an image gets higher scores, you're assuming as it gets up there that it's now ticking all those boxes. I think also we need to have faith in judges, and some people, there's people who look at judges and say, why are they judging? They shouldn't be judging. They're biased, etc., etc. And at the end of the day, a judge, my experience is that the majority of judges I've worked with genuinely end up scoring an image what they think it should get. And they might give a different score to someone else because they're a different person and they have different experiences and they respond differently, and that's all they can go on. And if we had a black and white objective way of scoring images, then we'd end up with exactly the same scores for every print. All the judges would give the same scores and it would be boring. So I think the other thing I like judges to be conscious of when they're judging, coming back to the philosophy, is that when you're judging, think of the entrant, like respect the entrant, that the entrant, whatever level they're at, and you might be looking at a score, you might be looking at an image that's worth a 98, 99, 100. You might be looking at an image that's going to scrape in with a 60 or a 50 and write it. But both of those photographers have put forward their best work. Both of those photographers consider this, here's my heart on my sleeve, I'm vulnerable. So treat them with equal respect. And it's easy to blow smoke, and make someone feel amazing because they've got a great image that you're judging, and whether they're watching you or they see it later, or even just giving them a score. But it's harder to judge the stuff at the bottom end. And that's the stuff that really needs us to do better, because that's where the education happens. That's where the motivation happens. And that's where you can kill someone's career or their motivation by just a few loose words. And thankfully, the days where judges will get up and say, I don't know who this work belongs to, but if it's yours, give up photography, take up something else. You know, I heard that in the early days. That sort of etiquette's changed, and you know, judges are now a lot more empathetic and compassionate, and they should be. But it doesn't mean you give away points. You can still give a very positive, inspiring critique or feedback on an image that's right at the bottom of a competition, because there is always a positive. There is always something in that image you can point out. You know, I really encourage the photographer because I applaud their bravery in taking on a new technique. I love what they've tried to do here. I think it can be done a little better, but I love what they've tried to do. The fact that they've tried to do something different. There's obviously a connection between the subject and the photographer here. You can see it. The lighting's not really helping us, and the composition's working against us. But gee, look at that connection. Whatever that is the secret sauce. Hang on to that. Build on it. So yep. I think having that's part of my philosophy, is making sure that everyone who walks away from a competition wants to come back. Not just come back to a competition, but keep taking pictures and want to get better.
Well, I have one more competition related question for you before we move on to a different subject. And you'll have to bear with me as I fumble through this particular question. So relating back to your International Landscape Photographer of the Year, a win, when I saw your name as the winner, my personal immediate reaction was like, yeah, that makes sense. His work is awesome. You know, I love Tony Hewitt's work. It's good stuff. And, you know, I'm an organizer for an international competition myself, the Natural Landscape Photography Awards. And so there's a lot of nuance with what I'm about to ask you. So I know, just because I can connect the dots, that your friend and business partner, Peter Eastway, is also a judge and organizer for the competition that you won. And I also know that you do workshops with Peter and things of that nature. A casual observer who doesn't do a lot of competitions or doesn't around competitions a lot, or maybe just doesn't know any better, they might assume that there's ulterior motives at play, that it's a whole secret cabal that's emerging here. Like, of course, his friend is going to win, right? And of course, we know this, like, you have really good work and that's the end of the story. But my question is, what safeguards do you think should exist in photography competitions in order to at least prevent the appearance or to prevent actual nepotism and favoritism? What are your thoughts on all that?
It's a really big subject, and it's one that it's come up a lot of times. So here's the thing, and make sure I come back to the point, if you will. But you've unpacked a lot of things. My experience over the last 30 years is that as you work into the industry, you get better at what you do, you make friends. And as you make friends, they're generally in the areas that you're in, and you end up going to conferences together, and then you end up judging together or being on a speaking agenda together and stuff like that. So, I've got friends all over the world who are landscape photographers, but also, portrait wedding. Because of my background in portrait wedding, I've got a lot of friends in Europe and in the States, in New Zealand, Asia, that are wedding portrait photographers. So you end up hanging out with and learning off and sharing ideas with the best of the best. And when it comes to running competitions, often, or being involved on boards or committees, panel chairs, so you get invited, you're a good photographer, you do well, you get invited to judge. So now you're a judge. And you keep going and you judge well and you win, your work gets better and you get better known, so they ask you to chair a panel. And then from there, you might be asked to chair the whole competition, which is kind of where I got to. And then I was asked to run the competitions like the ALPP's APA for a long time. And Peter did it before me. He wasn't the one straight before me, but he was before me a fair bit. But the point is, the further up you go, the less of you there is. And here's the thing, I'm still a photographer. I still want to participate, right? And in the early days, coming back to the competition that Peter and his partner is David Evans, I think it's David Evans. He and David run it. They also run the International Portrait Photography Year. When he first started that competition, I was one of the judges. I was one of the 5 international judges, and I judged for a couple of years. And then I wanted to enter, and probably shouldn't say this. Yeah. I didn't enter. I didn't enter for a while. And then I said to him, how do you feel about me entering that competition? The point is, he used to run APA. I used to run APA, and my friends entered APA. Most competitions, like where you have people judging in a group, those judges enter. The IIC, which is run out of Canada, the International Imaging Competition, they invited me to, like, I entered that competition, and then they invited me to judge. And as part of that competition, they said, as a judge, it's a requirement that you enter.
Huh.
Right? Now, obviously, they have lots of categories, so they say you have to enter, but you don't judge any of the categories that you enter. But again, the perspective from the outside is you're a judge and you entered. And then what they do is, as a judge, you enter, but you can't win a category. And it's almost like the better you get and the more you give back by judging. And people think, oh, judges are, it's this elitist, it's all an ego trip. There's an element of that, I'm sure. And yeah, hand up. In the early days, I was proud to be a judge and it made me feel good. But I've got to tell you, there's a lot of pressure and a lot of work, and you're actually giving back. And over the years, there's a lot of competitions that I didn't enter because I chose not to or I couldn't, that I wanted to, but instead I was giving back. And then at the end of the competition, everyone's walking around, I won this, I won that, I'm a legend, posting on social media. And you walk away, no one knows who you were because you did the job for them so they could have a competition in the first place. When I was chairman of APA, we used to put out surveys and find out what do you want, what don't you like, how can we improve? And Matt, this is something that I've never forgot. And we would get various forms of these letters, and we would get 40, 50, sometimes full-page letters of how we could improve the way the competition was run. And I remember one letter in particular which sort of summed up a lot of what was going on. And in this letter it said, I believe that you should be marketing and promoting and making sure that the best exponents of the genre enter this competition to give it credibility. And I look at that and I go, I tick that box. I agree. If we're going to have a landscape competition, we want the best landscape photographers. Wouldn't you agree with that? Right. To give it credibility, if you want it to be the best of the best, then you've got to have the best of the best. I'm not saying I'm the best of the best, but you know what I'm getting. In the same letter, in another paragraph, they said, I believe that you should have the best in this genre judging this competition. The best photographers of this should be the judges. And on that alone, I go, I agree, 100%. If we're going to judge the best landscapes in the world, we should have the best landscape photographers judging it. And I don't think many people can argue on that. But then at the bottom of the letter, it said, I vehemently disagree with judges being allowed to enter the competition. And you look at it and you go, but they're completely mutually incompatible. You can't have the best people enter, the best people judging, and the best people can't enter the competition. You can't have that. So that's where coming back to having trust in judges. So coming back to the safeguards, for instance, a lot of competitions, well, most competitions that I know of for a start, and I don't know of any that don't do this, a judge will not judge the category that they've entered. There's a few that might, but generally, if you're in a competition, you don't judge the category, you judge. In some that they do have that, it might only be one category, for instance, that's just one particular competition. You never judge your own work. Obviously, it makes sense. In say, we take panel judging in places like New Zealand with the NZIPP or AIPP used to have, WPPI, various panel type print judging. You could never judge your own work. You had to nominate if you knew the author. And one of the panel chairs generally would have a list of who associates. You couldn't judge, for instance, if you and I were business partners, I couldn't judge your work. You have to have that distance. But if you say you're not allowed to judge anyone's work and you're good at what you do and all the other people are good at what so how do you get around that? And I think Peter wrote, because he told me about it and then he ended up putting it in one of his magazine articles about the competition. that with the last year's results, it was a draw in the final because there's
I
five
think I
judges.
remember seeing
It was
that.
a
Yeah.
draw, and he told me, and this is the part I probably shouldn't say, but he told me that he said when the fifth guy, because the fifth guy had to choose, and I can't remember who that was, or fifth girl, I can't remember who it was, but the fifth judge had to then go and say, well, you didn't pick either of these, now you have to decide which one. And that judge judged. Peter said, I thought, damn it, because that makes it hard. And, I have been in positions with colleagues where I've had appeals against results of competitions, and the person appealing knew, or the person who was being appealed against was someone I knew, but I know a lot of people. So I come back with the question for you is that should the best photographers not be allowed to enter competitions? Would that then water down the quality of the competition? I think it would. Should the best judges not be allowed to judge if they're going to enter? And if you want the best ones entering, then you'll end up with a lower standard of judging. And that's not bad in itself. But if you want to get better judges, you want good photographers judging next to them so they become better as well. And it's all about that sharing and passing down the baton. So I think there's a lot of safeguards out there. Public judging certainly helps. People coming into a room and watching judges who have to justify why they've scored something the way they've scored it. Right. So you give a score, and the judge says, and this is where training of judges is so important. It's not enough. And as a chairperson and running, when we talk to judges, we say you can't just say I've given it a 95 because I like it. I love this image. This image is amazing. It's a gold. And then they look at the other judges and go, come on, can't you see it? That doesn't cut the mustard. If you have to allocate allocate or articulate why. Give me reasons. I find the composition in this image extremely powerful. The impact is going to resonate with me for a long time. The use of the contrast in this image to bring us to the forward part of the image, and the drop in contrast to the back gives it depth. I love the use of saturation that is concentrated more in the middle of the image to keep our eye from drifting out. There are no details to distract us on the outside. The expression is priceless and the moment was perfect. These are the reasons that I think this image is of the highest standard. Now, anyone wants to argue with me has to say, well, no, you're wrong. So
I do. Yeah.
And yeah, look, it's I was going to say you're a bugger for asking the question, but I have dealt with the question, or I've dealt with that particular question as a judge, as an entrant, as a winner, as a chairman, as an appeal judge. I have to sort of go back and appeal, and I understand it, but I'm very comfortable with the way most competitions are run. I'm very comfortable with the fact that in order for there to be that level of nepotism and things that you're talking about, you need the collaboration of a group of people who are at the highest level of the industry. And I don't think a whole bunch of people are going to say, yeah, that's a nice person, let's help him out. I just don't think that happens. And most competitions are run in a way, that's why you don't have one judge. A lot of the the print judgings where they have scores, we have things like a majority rule. So you'll have a scoring mechanism that says, okay, from 50 to 100, 90 and above is a gold. So you get a judge that says, oh, it's my best mate's work, I'll give it 99. And the other judges give it 80. And it averages somewhere around, my maths isn't there, but somewhere around 85 or 84, right? It's going to get 85. But if two judges give it 99 and three give it 85 because the two judges know them, now it gets 92. But with the majority rule, it can't get a 92 because three judges gave it below 90, so it actually gets an 89. And as most of those major competitions run something like that, where in order to get that gold, you need 3 out of 5 judges to score it gold. Even if it averages gold, if it doesn't get 3 judges, it'll stay down. And it works the other way, where judges, people worry about nepotism, someone got pushed up. Mate, I can tell you, I've looked at my work sometimes, and I've looked at my colleagues' works and gone, geez, they got burnt because somebody had it in. It can happen.
I was going to say, my experience has been most, from what I've seen, like you said, people know each other. They're very familiar with each other's work, and oftentimes they're harder on the work that they're familiar with. So I think sometimes you're at a disadvantage if you're well known and you have a lot of friends in the industry, because your work is going to be looked at from a more critical perspective. Whereas if you're kind of this nobody that came out of nowhere, nobody knows who you are, they're going to be much more surprised by the work. They're going to be, I think there's some advantages to that. So,
Well,
yeah.
the thing is, impact. The more well known your style of work is known, the harder it is to get impact. People often go, "Oh, I think I know who this is," or they recognise a style, and so it's straight away it's lost a little bit of impact because they've
Right.
seen it. Whereas if you come out of the box with something and no one knows you, it's like, wow, this is fresh, and straight away you got the judge's attention. So it does help. The other thing to remember too is that people chairing competitions, like, well, say Peter, you brought up Peter and David's competition. Peter's not a judge. He's running the competition. He's got 5 judges. As I said, you got people like David Burnett. I mean, these are world-class established photographers. And secondly, I don't know of any competitions I can think of where you know who the author is. And so the
Oh,
work
right.
is anonymous. So how can you favour? Now, yeah, people say, yeah, but you recognise it and whatever. Yeah, you can, but again, that can work against you. So I think the safeguards that are there are pretty good. I think that these days where we look for more feedback on competition entries keeps judges far more accountable than they used to be, where it was just a score. Now, predominantly most competitions, every image gets a comment of something. So if you give it a 50 and then you tell us how brilliant it is, or you give it a 99 and then bag out 6 different things that are wrong with it, then you go, well, hang on, there's something
Right.
going on here. So, yeah, I think most of it's there. And again, I come back to consistency. I do a lot of coaching, and with people who enter competitions, I say, don't worry about whether you win something or lose. Just look at your average across. Are your scores generally going up? Is your average score slowly improving? That's the mark of success, not the odd one here or there. And
Well,
hopefully most people look at the work that I won with and say, he deserved it. I'm sure there won't be everybody.
yeah. No, I mean, that's what I said. I was like, oh, yeah, I'm familiar with his stuff and it's really good. So,
Thank you.
that was my reaction. But, I'm in a Discord server and there was a lot of people that were like, oh, it's because they know each other. And I was like, well, yeah, that looks bad, but it doesn't mean something happened.
So yeah, and that's my point. Just to finish it off, that I've got people that, because I've chaired awards, that have come to me and said, should I not enter because you're such a good friend? And I said, well, that's not fair. Why should you not be allowed to enter because we're friends? If you're on the committee or you're involved. Now, at some point, people have to go, I'm quite happy for people to look at me, listen to this podcast, look at my work, go to my website and say, he looks like a bit of a shady guy that would take every advantage he can and cheat and rip people off. Well, if that's your opinion, I can't change it unless you get to know me. Or ask people about me that know me. Don't ask people that don't know me. Don't ask about, the. No, I was gonna name some competitions and people who won, and I know that they're very good friends with people at the top, and you could go through just about every competition. Jerry Gionis in WPPI, he's won competitions all over the world. Do you know who Jerry is?
I don't.
No, so there you go. So Jerry's probably one of the top 5 wedding photographers in the world, and if in the wedding area, Jerry would be, he's up there with people like Sue Bryce, and these are the icons in that industry in terms of teaching, coaching, competition, and so on. And he was part of the competition, and we were part of committees. You'll be running competitions and you want to be part of the competition. But if we said to judges, and we went through the process with the Australian Institute where we talked about not allowing judges to enter, we would have had no judges. So there would be no competition. Right. So I ask people who have these questions, do you want a competition and do you want to hear from judges who know what they're talking about? And you want those competitions to have people in it that you look at and go, I beat such and such, or I'm competing with the best, or not. And you can't have both. And at some point, you've got to say, well, the competition safeguards are pretty good. And look, I honestly think if there is nepotism, you get found out. You get found out if you cheat. Honestly,
Right.
people talk. It's a small industry. Find the facts. Don't go on social media and think that's the truth. Find the facts. But I don't know of many competitions, and we've had a couple over the years where we've had to disqualify people. But that was after an exhaustive months of research to make sure that what was innuendo and gossip was real, and it was. But 99% of the time, if I got somebody said, you got to look into this, there was nothing. It was just personality bias and jealousy and stuff like that. So,
Right. Or like, oh, they just don't like that person, or they don't like their
yeah, I hope
photography
I
or
answered that the
whatever.
way you wanted, Matt, because it's an interesting one.
Yeah, totally. In that, you talked a little bit about the concept of photographic style. How would you even define that?
I think, I alluded earlier to photography as a language, and it's how we share visually our experiences and our responses to the world around us. And to me, style is your language. When I look at someone's picture, I think, oh, I like that. I like the way they do that. It's their language. And I love analogies and I love music. And if you picture if you and the people who've heard me speak will know this analogy because I've shared it a lot, but I'm going to share it again. Picture an orchestra, full orchestra with every instrument, and you've got a sheet of music on a podium in front of that orchestra, and there are two conductors. One conductor comes out and they want to play this piece of music with drama. So they look at the trombones and they look at the kettle drums and they look at the bass, and they get them to play as loud and heavy and really strong, powerful, impactful music. And the violins are kept a bit quiet and the flute in the background. And they really go for this powerful piece. Then they leave, and then another conductor comes out, but they want to have something with a bit more sort of a silky, smooth, romantic feel to it. So they play down the kettle drums and they quiet the bass and the trombones and they bring up the viola and they bring up the harp and they get that feel. And it can be the exact same notes on the exact same piece of paper. But those conductors have different styles and they interpret the music differently, and they want to express that interpretation or their response differently. So when we talk about photography, style is we can take a whole bunch of people who look at the same thing. Style begins in the way they capture it. Some will use wide lenses, some use long lenses, some use long exposures, some want to freeze the action, make it more dramatic, make it more cutting and hard-edged. Smooth water softens it and gives us a more ethereal feel. Same subject matter, but they're responding to different elements of the energy around them. And then when they edit, same thing. Do I give it hard contrast? Do I give it a softer feel? Do I desaturate? Do I give it heavy blacks? Do I print on a glossy paper? Do I print? And all of these are decisions that are made to provide an outlet to the world of how I want you to understand how I experience this. And I think that's style. And you can break that down into, this person loves black and white and this person loves heavy color. You can go in, they are always saturated, or, they're always doing this. I look at the people that I know and I travel with, like Christian Fletcher, I think. Have you had Christian on your show yet? Christian's a very close friend of mine as well, who's also won the International Landscape Photographer of the Year, so go figure. I look at Christian's style and I watch him when he gets to us. I've been on location with him many times, and he would get to a location and he would just have this instinctive feel of what to shoot. And he'd just go about, shoot, and move on, move on, move on. Then in the same shoot, you might have someone like Dr. Les Walkling, and I don't know if you know that name, but you should.
Also had him on as well.
Yeah, he's a absolute guru. I mean, he's one of the world's leading color experts. And a fine art, he got a degree in fine art, a doctorate or whatever. And you watch him on the same location shoot, he would get there and he would walk around with his kick-ass tripod and his big sort of medium format camera, and he would walk around and stop and look and put the tripod down and stand there and study it and then move on and not take pictures until he found exactly what he was looking for. And you would see later on the deliberateness of Leza in his work versus the instinctive nature of Christian. So I think style is when people look at it, they get a little bit of a window into not only what parts of what you see that you enjoy, but also the avenues about or the process that you go through in order to share it. So when people look at my work, they'll see often that I'm fascinated by symbology and shape and design. I wouldn't call it minimalist, but it's definitely got geometric flavor to it. I had a lot of, I was very strong in mathematics and physics at school, 95 plus and all of that sort of thing. So the geometry and the balance mathematically is very important to me, but I don't follow compositional rules such as the rule of thirds or, Fibonacci sequences and that. I don't follow them academically, but I probably follow them intuitively. And I use more of a feel for balance. I know when it feels right. I'll look at the image, the composition, when I'm setting up my camera or when I'm cropping later, and I'll think, right, there's a feeling of weight going that way. It's falling away or it's too heavy down here. How do I balance that out? Do I crop a little bit? Do I push back the contrast? Do I bring up the saturation? All of that is an instinctive feel to find balance.
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of my language. That's part of my style, if you like. And symbology and geometry are very much a part of it. Use of selective contrast and selective saturation to get depth, move people in and out of a picture, not just across and up and down. That's also part of my style. So I think that's kind of it.
Yes, I mean, you speak with a lot of confidence about your style, your preferences, your approach. If someone isn't as confident in their style and they want to develop it or refine it further, what would you say in terms of things that they should do in order to take that on?
Okay. When I travel, I often journal. So I write a lot of poetry. I've always written poetry, and a lot of my exhibitions have poetry as part of the exhibition. And it's in the words that I can identify the elements that I was responding to or that I'm most fascinated by in that location. I suggest to people, okay, when you've finished a shoot, just write down 3 words from that shoot. If there's people listening to this that have been on workshops with me or photo tours, they're going to laugh because often what will happen will be in the bus or traveling back or sitting at dinner, and I'll say, right, 3 words for today, and everyone will crack up going, oh, here we go. But the thing is, if I said to you, you've been on a shoot down the beach, you went to Hawaii, you're on a nice beach at sunset, had a couple of glasses of wine, it was a warm tropical breeze blowing, one of the best sunsets you've ever seen, the trees were blowing, moving, palm trees, and you're sort of sitting back later having a glass of wine. I say, well, what's 3 words to describe the experience? And you might say romantic, ethereal, warm. I say, great. When you edit, how do you bring those through? Because if you, first thing you did was go autocorrect color and take out all the warmth, well, now you've lost the romance and you've lost, you lost the warmth. And so like thinking like that, if you're up early and you're shooting on an icy environment and the light's blue because it still has, the sun hasn't come up and you've got that blue light. And again, you shoot on auto color, white balance, and then it neutralizes all your whites, so they're white, not blue. And then you want people to say, what's the words? And they say, oh, it was freezing, it was stark, and it was isolated. Well, a warm color palette doesn't accentuate those. And one of the things I learned about communication skills in another world was when we communicate something verbally, if the language we use, the tone of voice, and our body language are not in alignment, then the message is not strong. If you ask somebody, how was your day? And they go, oh, it was bloody great. Their body language is
Right.
not looking good. The tone of voice is not good, but the words said it was great. In fact, they accentuated it by saying bloody great. Now, in communication, we know that 7% of the communication is the word. 38% is the tone of voice, and 55% of the communication is the body language. Same thing in photography. If I want you to feel the romance between a couple and I make the light cold, cold does not correlate with passion and romance. Warmth does. So if I look at a picture and I say, I want you to feel the depth of this landscape, and I want the foreground to feel like it's right under your toes, and I want the background back there. Well, if I was a painter and I wanted something to feel closer, would I give it more contrast or less contrast? Well, the answer is more contrast. If I want it to feel closer, would it have richer color or more or less rich, desaturated? Well, richer. What's closer? Is it usually sharper or softer? Well, it's usually sharper if you want to feel it close. So these things become that language. So when we coming back to your question, I would suggest that people could sort of go, okay, I know what I saw because it's in the photo, but what did I feel? And why did I press the trigger? And you don't have to be a poet. You don't have to write stories. Write down 3 words, bullet points. Shoot 1, sunset beach, warmth, romance, warm wind. Now, how can you, with your score as the conductor, use that orchestra to get that feeling through your picture? That's what I would say. That's the simplest way I could put it.
Oh, it's simple, but it's powerful. Thank you, Tony. That was
You're
great.
welcome.
I'm going to use that. That was really good. And it's perfect too, because I feel like for a lot of us, when we come back from our outings, it's hard sometimes to remember exactly what we were feeling, and oftentimes I've heard some photographers give advice like, oh, I let it sit and I marinate and I don't look at it for like weeks or months at a time. And what you can still do if you follow this process of like taking notes, and then I think that can help guide when you're in the moment. There's a reason why you wanted to capture that, right? Like something drew you to photograph that subject, or the way you were feeling as a photographer, or the way you were having a two-way communication with the subject. Like that was a powerful thing for you. And so having some kind of record of that so that you can approximate that as best as possible when you go to edit the image, I think that's a really profound and insightful and useful tool to put in the toolbox.
Well, and the other thing is, if you don't, if you're in your car, we're all used to using Siri or AI or Chat GPT or talking. You've got a voice recorder on your phone, and
Right.
you can be in the car and you just go, Siri record, give the date, 1st of January 2024, hills, mist on the hills in the evening. A couple of things to remember. It was spooky. It was mysterious, and it was very flat and grungy. Now, those are words you can use when you go and edit, and they
Right.
contribute to the decision. When we make micro decisions when we're editing, how much curve, how much contrast, how much of this, how little of that, should I, shouldn't I? And you have those words in the background, it works. And, like, as I said, for me, I sometimes write bloody whole poems about a shoot, and then I like to go back to them, and it reminds me of what that pictures are there to illustrate in terms of, the ethereal side of it and stuff like that.
That's brilliant. All right, Tony. Earlier, you had alluded to this idea that you do mastermind groups. What is that about?
Okay. I do every year. I run a mastermind group. I mean, we charge for it, but it's 6 people who work with me over a period of about 10 months, which culminates in a retreat. So they each come into that program, and it's not a curriculum-based program. Each person's on their own journey, but it kind of taps into the value of a brains trust. Often, we take pictures and we put them on social media. We share them with our friends, and how many likes? Do people like what I do? We all want the feedback. And if we have certain followers who like what we do, oh, you're a legend, it's amazing, this is incredible, blah, blah, blah. And that's really nice. It makes us feel good. But we kind of lack that honest feedback. You'll get the trolls who'll come on there and go, this is crap, it's been done before, they're copying such and such, whatever. But so part of Mastermind is to allow people to have a small group that are each working on their own creative journey, but accountable to each other, which I facilitate and I oversight. They work with me every month, one-on-one, and they also have a group session where they share the progress of their projects or whatever. And I use the word project because I find in coaching that when people want to learn or progress, having a vehicle or a purpose upon which those learnings can happen. And when you have a project, there's specific skill sets you need to bring in. There's ones you've got and you find the gaps and you learn them. And then there's things you go, I don't really need that, so I'll leave that. I don't need to spend time on that. And then at the end of the year, we present our project, whatever it is. It could be a book, it could be an exhibition, it could be an AV, it could be a box of pictures, whatever, calendar, all sorts of things. And we do a presentation that we go away somewhere. We all live in a house together. I get a big executive 10-bedroom, 5-bathroom on the beach type stuff. And we spend 3 or 4 days together. We go visit museum. I usually bring in a visiting artist who's from that area, who I know. Another advantage of knowing people all over the place, and maybe a disadvantage. But bringing in people that are world class and having them come and share their story with my group. And the group also brings prints, and we do print swaps. So that's what Mastermind is. It doesn't suit everybody, so I do a lot of one-on-one at the moment. I've got people in England, Switzerland, Canada, US, New Zealand, Asia, and Australia. And I'll just have different things we work on. And it's about facilitating a process where they can grow in the direction that they may need in the beginning, clarity about what that direction is, because often people, it's strangely enough, say, well, I'm not sure what I want to do. Well, let's start with that. And then let's set some goals that are achievable and identify the parts you need to learn. Now, I'm not a jack of all trades. I'm not an expert in everything in photography. But having done 1,000 weddings, at least 6,000 portraits of families and kids and things, commercial work, landscape work, exhibited 13 solos and a bunch of group ones, run competitions, won competitions, entered competitions, judged them, been involved in all sorts of things, public speaking. The point I'm making is I've got a background. I've done books. I mean, the project I did, which was Girth by Sea, where we travelled around Australia, myself and another photographer, for a month and photographed the entire continent, 85,000 pictures, a 100-piece exhibition. So the point is, when people are on the mastermind or coaching, they tap into that. This is starting to sound like a sales pitch, and I wasn't meant to. But the idea is I've got a background. So when people are trying to figure out where they want to go, and a lot of my clients are people who are doing photography because they love it, not because they're starting out to build a business necessarily, although some are transitioning, would like to open up a website and sell pictures. There's a few of those. Some of them are just wanting to get better at their photography. Some would like to do better in competition. Whatever it is, they can tap into. And my job is to challenge, keep them accountable to themselves, because that's the hardest thing as creators we sometimes have, is to stay accountable to ourselves, stay disciplined, and to keep setting goals that we can achieve, but then keep moving forward. So Mastermind's about the group. It starts at the beginning of each year and ends towards the end of the year. It's full. It's always full. And basically the people on this year sort of got interested last year and waited, and 4 people missed out this year. So some of those will end up maybe in next year's, and some of them are doing one-on-ones with me at the moment. So that's what Mastermind is.
Sounds amazing. Hopefully you'll get some interest in that from this, because as you're describing it, I was like, that sounds so perfect for so many people that I know that are struggling with, trying to, just raise the bar just a little bit further. And something like that, I feel like, can really help with that.
Yeah, I think it allows me to bring in my other background skills in terms of coaching skills and, the NLP stuff, working with people to help them understand themselves, help them get some clarity around what it is they love about photography and what is the hard work bit that they don't necessarily need to do. And understanding that sometimes to achieve really great images can be done in a lot simpler way than people expect. It's amazing how many people feel like they're never going to get there because software gets harder. I've got to learn this, I've got to learn that. I don't use everything in Photoshop. One of the things I like people to understand is you need to learn what you need to learn to do what it is you want to do. But the key driver is, what do you want to do? And often it's like, oh, you got to learn this. Oh, have you got that software? Have you got that plugin? Oh, no, I haven't. I better get it. Now I better learn it. There's so many things out there. But if you look back on a picture 10 years ago that was an incredible picture, it's probably still an incredible picture. And guess what? They didn't have AI. They didn't have Topaz. They didn't have this plugin, that plugin, whatever. They probably weren't using medium format, and they may not have even had digital if it was 20 years ago. It's still a great picture. So it's sort of like demystifying it is a lot of what I do, and then helping people identify where they're best focused to get the greatest return and the greatest growth in the area that they want to go in photography. I'm big on legacy projects, doing things that have value down the line. So.
I like that a lot. Okay, Tony, last question. Who do you recommend for the podcast? Who are some people that we need to get to know here?
Well, you've already had a few of them, I think. Do you know who Andre Duman is?
I do not.
Well, I'm going to suggest you look him up. He's a really cracking guy. He's North American and commercial, but it does a bit of everything. And I think your listeners would get a lot out of hearing what Andre has to say. He takes on these really incredible projects and then just dives into what he needs to learn and what he needs to know to make it happen. He did one recently called Exogenics or something like that, which was involving a collaboration with a world Lego master. And they created these models of organs of the body and then lit it and turned it into an exhibition in Paris. And then he creates these photographs. You got to see it, Andre Duman.
Wow.
And he's worked with, he's done, worked with Tony Hawk, Skateboard King, works with, cars, does a lot of high-end shoots like that. Chris Dark is a photographer who's been around for us. Have you heard of Chris?
Yeah, Chris Saunders recommended him as well.
Yeah, so Chris is someone who I've known for a while. He's also from Perth, so we've got a few of us over here. Tanya Niwa is an interesting photographer in New Zealand. I don't know if that name's come across your radar.
Nope.
She's a master photographer. She did well in both Australia and New Zealand. She does a lot of cultural projects with the Maori, but she's also does a lot of commercial shoots. She's done fashion. She's shooting a lot starting to use drone work, photographing her tribal ancestry areas around Mount Taranaki, which is in the bottom of the North Island, New Zealand. Really, really top lady, and got a lot to offer in terms of people who want to sort of photograph landscape, but culture as well. Doug Porter, you may have come across that name. He's a guy in Melbourne. He does a lot of art-inspired type photography in terms of landscape, urban landscape, things like that. Jordan Cantelo, you may have come across that name.
I have, but I can't put my finger on where.
He's from my neck of the woods. Jordan's amazing guy. They're all brilliant people and great photographers. Jordan photographs a lot of storms. He does a lot of the thunderstorm build-up and lightning and does incredible shots of that sort of stuff. Some of these people I've done workshops and photo tours with. Some of them I haven't, but that's sort of a group of people I suggest you look at.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, Tony, this has been an amazing conversation. You left us with actionable advice that we can use to improve our photography. So thank you very much.
You're welcome, mate. Thanks for having us.
Of course. Well, thank you to Tony for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us for the podcast. I had a blast, and I hope that listeners will try out some of the tips that you shared with us today to elevate their photography or improve their chances in photography competitions. I also think that your masterclass sounds incredible, so I do hope that interested listeners will take a closer look. As always, you can find links to everything that we discussed in the show notes, either on YouTube or wherever you listen to the podcast. If you found value in today's discussion, I'd love to hear from you on Patreon. Not only is Patreon the best way for you to financially support the podcast, it is also the best place for you to engage in conversation with other listeners about each and every episode. The best part is that you can join for free. Just go to patreon.com/fstop and listen. Thanks for your support of the show. I appreciate each and every one of you who help out on Patreon. You are the lifeblood of this production, so thank you. Okay, I think that's all for now. Thanks for stopping in, collaborating with us, and listening. See you next week.